Well, thank you very much. Thanks to Jeff and all the association members for having me back. I'm going to hop down. Let me find the clicker here quickly. I can't stand in one spot long enough to stand behind a podium, so we'll get rolling. So the first thing, before I start getting into a lot of the nuts and bolts on production, first off, excellent job, Preston. That was a fantastic update and tremendous amount of optimism. You'll see a lot of that carry over into some of the work you'll see here in a moment. So quickly on the construction, what you're seeing in western North Dakota, as far as the industry itself, this is an updated, latest data we have is from 2023. You can see in the vertical bars how many new pipeline miles were being added in any given year, and then in red is our total aggregate miles of transmission and gathering. A very different view today than it was 10 years ago. Certainly during the time when operators were looking to hold production by drilling wells across just about every section or every spacing unit in western North Dakota. And at that time we needed a tremendous amount of pipeline miles just to get connectivity done. As the operators have become more focused, they've concentrated in certain areas, they've concentrated on locations, and so we're actually at a very similar pace as far as how active they are in geographic areas. It just looks much different because of a different profile. We're seeing a lot more strategic pipelines being built. The capacity of the individual systems rival even some of the transmission pipelines out there. These are not always your small 4 or 6 inch pipes. These can be pretty substantial gathering pipelines. And then when we break that down as far as how many miles of gathering systems are being put in, and then at the bottom on the transmission, those are your larger interstate lines. The one thing I want to highlight here at the bottom, if you look at the early days of pipeline development on the transmission side is what I will focus most of my time on here today. You'll see in green, those are new transmission miles for crude oil pipelines. At that time, crude oil was the loudest dog barking. We had to find solutions for our crude oil egress out of the basin. What you won't notice are a whole lot of red gas transmission miles built. There's been some, but the focus was heavily on oil. Today, we've completely flip-flopped that. 90+% of the focus of what I do on a day-to-day basis is trying to figure out the next sets of transmission solutions for natural gas, and we'll get moving into that. So quickly, just following up, Preston talked about some of the rigs. Quickly on price, this is just an updated graphic. I get asked a lot, what happens when oil prices move $5, $10, $20? Right now, kind of the modern era of Bakken drilling, you can see on the right-hand side how our rig count moves per dollar of WTI, and it's roughly about a 0.5 metric. And so that has kind of settled in at the post-COVID kind of new normal, if you want to call it that. And so if oil prices move $10, we may at least be able to reasonably suggest that we would see maybe 5 rig move, plus or minus, depending upon how oil prices are moving today. And when we look forward, Preston nailed it on the head that rigs tell just a part of the story. Completions and how many new wells are actually being brought online is what, in the immediate term, I focus a lot of my time on, and then forecasting it out. What you'll see on this graphic is a scenario where I put it all out on the table. I say, what does North Dakota's oil production look like under all these different completion scenarios? And you can see in the middle, I've stamped on some of the latest statistics from the DMR department. And the first half of 2024 was relatively weak. We were seeing sub 60 new wells coming online. And you can see the first half of 2024, if you were watching the production numbers, we were seeing North Dakota's oil production as a state starting to slide. And that all went hand in hand together. It was to be expected if that was the pace of completions. The positive news is that as we started to turn a corner in July and certainly into August, now approaching almost 100 well completions. I think there's a tremendous amount of catch-up that's going to take place over the second half of this year. So here in another week or two, when the August oil production numbers come out from the DMR, I'm expecting we start to see ourselves back on the growth trajectory and get out of this slump until we get more towards the wintertime norms. The other number that a lot of folks don't always appreciate is what we have as far as frac crews. We always talk about drilling rig counts, but the number of frac crews that are active in North Dakota, it's a little bit more challenging to find that number. It's published every month by DMR, but you can see it's been kind of in the lower teens, approaching 20 last year. And if you look at how efficient our frac crews are, today, just rule of thumb, you can assume that every frac crew can do about a little over 5 well completions per month. And so if we know we need X amount of well completions to grow North Dakota's oil production, we can do a little bit of math and say, how many frac crews is that going to take? And so with wrapping everything in on well performance and 3-mile lateral assumptions, everything else, my number is that we need somewhere north of 14 frac crews active in North Dakota in order to start getting back on that growth trajectory for our oil production. Over the summer, we were kind of at 14 or down to 13 in August. Great news last month, the September DMR report, they said we were at 20 frac crews. So we did see a pretty substantial jump up here. And so I suspect then as we trail into the latter half of this year, we'll start seeing some significant catch up on these well completions. So all that wraps together. I use the EIA every month, and then every year they put out oil price outlooks. I wrap that in to my assumptions, and you can see a couple different scenarios for where we could see North Dakota's oil heading here long term. And so you'll see a base case and then a low case scenario. So we do certainly have the locations, the technology in the near term to get back on a growth trajectory. You'll hear me talk in a moment about what some of the challenges are going to be, and they're going to fall back on the natural gas side of the world. Our crude oil outlook looks very strong. Our pipeline network today very well positioned in order to continue to move even slight growth of production to markets around the U.S. So we're in a really good position there, assuming the Dakota Access Pipeline stays in service. So, coming back to the natural gas side of the equation. Now, this is something that, in order to come up with a complete solution for this industry, you've got to start all the way back at the producing location and figure out what can we reasonably expect, and then how do we design and build systems from the industry perspective to capture that gas and get it moved to market. Natural gas performs a lot differently than our crude oil systems do. This is that same production outlook, but you'll notice almost all the scenarios see growth, and that has to do with what's happening downhole at the reservoir level, the geology, the way that as pressure is depleted in this reservoir, you see more and more natural gas being released from barrels in the subsurface, and then natural gas moves very easily through that fracture network, and we start getting gassier and gassier wells as these wells age. And so you can see if we start getting back up into the 70 well completions, 80 plus well completions per month, that continues this aggressive growth trend that we've been on now really since COVID passed. So when we look at that oil production outlook that I presented here a moment ago, that even with some slight growth in that base case on crude oil, that natural gas has a very meaningful growth trajectory to it that we need to be ready for. We need to have solutions in order to realize the upside on the crude oil. And then the gas oil ratio that a lot of folks talk about, we just hit another record level GOR in July. That trend is going to continue upward. It's going to have its ups and downs, but that's just the way the reservoir operates. We can't avoid it. You can't produce the crude oil without the natural gas. If people could, I'm sure they would attempt that, but we can't, and so we got to be ready for growing levels of natural gas in order to keep this industry rolling. So at the localized level, the gathering, processing, that's the first phase. That was one of our biggest challenges really for the last 15 years, was investments that were coming online and keeping pace with a rapid development and rapid expansion. And so we're in a really good spot right now. We saw a tremendous amount of investment by the midstream partners, particularly right before COVID hit. We saw a massive expansion in gas processing, gathering to feed those facilities. And then at that time, we kind of reset the numbers, and we've been in a really good spot. We've been exceeding DMR's gas capture rates. The challenge then becomes, in the next several years, it appears, if you believe these forecasts, that we're going to be in a scenario again where we're looking at what's the next sets of gas processing expansions look like. Where do those need to be? How big? What are the parameters around that? And then what do you do with the tailgate? Yes, sir.
So you said something, assuming that Dakota access pipeline stays open,
Yes.
is there potential that something crazy could happen to that?
Yep. So
I mean, you've got an election going on here. Is there a chance that just shuts it down or something?
So right now it's still working through the EIS process. The question, if you weren't able to hear, was about the Dakota access pipe on the crude oil side. So it still is working through the EIS process. We're expecting a response next year on that. It was supposed to be done prior. So there is still a risk factor there. We're staying optimistic. We've made a strong argument from the state of North Dakota that that needs to stay in service. Yeah, and so again, the one challenge with natural gas is that, you know, when we start here at the gathering and processing, there's a whole lot of moving pieces that all need to fit together. You can have all the processing in the world, but if you don't have the transmission side at the tailgate of those facilities in order to manage all the dry gas that comes from those plants, if you don't have a way to manage the natural gas liquids from that gas processing facility, it's all for lost. And at the same token, it's really tough to develop transmission pipelines if you don't have gas processing plants to feed them. And so we get into this scenario where it's this, you know, back and forth discussion of, okay, where's production going? What needs to come first? Is it processing? What needs to, you know, is it transmission solutions need to come first, and we'll build the processing to meet that. So those are all things that are constantly circling around as we're looking for these opportunities. So our natural gas transmission system, you can see it here. These are all the major natural gas pipelines and then the gas processing facilities scattered throughout western North Dakota feeding into these systems. When we look at it on a capacity standpoint, our largest transmission system in service today is the Northern Border Pipeline. We are heavily reliant on this system that was originally designed to be a Canadian pipeline that happened to travel through North Dakota and pick up a little bit of gas prior to the Bakken, and now it's become our largest egress option, and we now transmit, you know, close to 80 to 90+% of all the molecules on that Northern Border Pipeline have switched to North Dakota gas as opposed to dwindling amounts of Canadian gas. And the way we see the world today, this is about it. The Northern Border Pipeline today is our last major egress option out of the basin until we can get some more pipes in service. And so you can see this trend where it continues to move upwards. There will become a point where competition becomes incredibly intense with Canadian shippers. Canadian shippers that have production in Canada hold about 10% of the capacity, so we're likely in the coming, call it a year or 2 years, going to be seeing some intense competition to try and force those Canadian molecules elsewhere. We have one gas pipeline expansion that is coming into service in 2026, which is going to buy us some time. Not a tremendous amount of time, but we'll just focus on the top portion here. Prior to Bakken Express, like I said, the next year, we'll call it year to 2 years, is going to be incredibly tight in the natural gas market as production continues to grow. And then post 2026, as we look at, you know, this white space is indicative of shortages of natural gas solutions. And so we're trying to figure out how do we fill in the gaps here. What can we do in state? What can we do as far as pipe transmission out of the state? Continue to stack solutions on top of this outlook so that we don't find ourselves in a scenario where activity is constrained, oil production gets constrained as a result of inadequate natural gas solutions for the basin. So that one project that we do have coming online, that's using the existing Bison pipeline. That was a system that was originally designed to carry Powder River gas to North Dakota. Obviously, as the entire market's swirled around and shifted over the last 15 years, that pipeline has been sitting idle. So the intent is to expand compression and then reverse that system and bring that Bakken gas down to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where it would then interconnect with a number of other natural gas pipelines in the region. So the options beyond 2026, what do they look like? We've got a number of them, and I think every one of these is going to play a role in coming up with a solution. And then I put in red kind of our last, you know, the worst case scenario, which is contraction. If we can't get these solutions in place, we don't want to find operators looking to deploy capital to say we can't stick these dollars in North Dakota, or We have to pull back our investment there because we just don't have the ability to reliably capture our gas, avoid flaring, and have a reasonable market option. The one piece that has been continuing to grow over the last year has been the consumption side. 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said that consumption within North Dakota was going to play a very small piece of it. We were very heavily focused on the construction side, trying to figure out new pipes to either Chicago or Iowa, Cheyenne, but I'm becoming more and more convinced that consumption could play a majority share if some of the projects that are being explored in North Dakota come into service. So, what do those look like? You've likely all seen in the news a number of different industries either that have announced projects. You've got Cirelon up in the Trenton area, other industrial users. This is that mining, that iron ore facility near Underwood that's proceeding forward. You've got gas-fired power generation. And the other big opportunity that's exploring North Dakota is AI data centers and what those might potentially look like. And then whether or not natural gas fired generation will be the source of the power for those facilities. And so this was a map. I just threw this up there. I thought this was interesting. This is kind of the net in and outs for all the states in the U.S. and whether they're a net natural gas consumer or whether they're a net natural gas exporter. All the green states you see here are net natural gas exporters. There's no reason that North Dakota has to remain green. If we can find economic opportunities in North Dakota to use this natural gas in state, I would love a scenario where we start to see this green fade a bit, and if not completely turn all the way red, if some of those opportunities that are exploring come to pass. So one of the questions, these next sets of slides, I apologize, they're going to get really busy. Just for what it's worth, one of the questions that a lot of us have had to answer in the last 6 months is what opportunities exist for large natural gas consuming industries in the state? How large can we go in North Dakota, right? We've got a scenario where we say, okay, we need X amount of natural gas solutions to support our oil and gas industry. The discussions have even gone above and beyond that, saying we don't want to know just what North Dakota has. We want to also know what North Dakota can offer as far as its connectivity to Canada, interconnectivity to Wyoming. Can we bring additional gas and from Canada into North Dakota, because we have potential business plans that could far exceed even what North Dakota needs just from our own perspective. So it's been really fun to take a look at kind of reimagining what's possible for the Williston Basin and for North Dakota in this natural gas front. Again, a lot of this relies on some of those power generation needs for either industrial consumers or AI or data centers. A lot of unknowns right now of what the timing and scope of those might look like. But certainly it's been fun to be at the table with them, working with the pipeline companies to try and figure out solutions for where those might fit into North Dakota's energy landscape going forward. A piece of that I think gets underappreciated for sure is kind of some of the intermittency that comes with gas-fired use, whether that's for industrial uses, seasonal heat uses, or even on an hourly basis on some of the peaking gas-fired generation. And so North Dakota, we have a tremendous asset down here just along the North Dakota-Montana border. That is the WBI natural gas storage field. And so natural gas storage, I think, is going to continue to play a growing role in shaping the outlook for North Dakota to be a prime opportunity and a prime place to put gas-consuming industries. This has the ability then, this is North America's single largest natural gas storage field right here in our backyard. Bigger than any single Canadian gas storage field, bigger than any single Gulf Coast gas storage field. We've got it right here. And its connectivity to the rest of North Dakota will be critical then going forward in order to shape some of the swings that can happen with production or consumption or all the ebbs and flows that will be necessary to shape North Dakota going forward. So with that, I've got just a few more minutes here, taking a look at how do we get these projects done. Traditionally, In order to get any type of natural gas transmission solution completed, you had to have several parties come forward, and those are known as pipeline shippers. What's been changing in North Dakota is our role from a state's perspective and our ability to come in now as one of those shippers in order to support these projects going forward. And so while for years the Pipeline Authority, our office, has been really focused on the needs analysis, working on support and data analytics to support and verify the need for new projects, we're now finding ourselves in a position where the Pipeline Authority, through the Industrial Commission, could actually be a participant in order to help get some of these projects over the finish line as they move forward. So a lot of fun, exciting stuff on that front. Not a lot to talk about right now publicly, but that was a tremendous tool that the legislature gave the Pipeline Authority and the Industrial Commission during the last legislative session. And I'm sure in this next upcoming session it's going to be something that will be a hot topic to see how it's been going and whether or not there's needs to tweak or modify some of those tools available to us. And then last but not least, natural gas liquids. This is a whole nother set of transmission infrastructure within the state. Our natural gas liquids, we produce roughly 800,000 barrels a day of NGLs in North Dakota. Most of that's moving out by pipeline system, and then we've got a number, about 1 train per day, leaving from a handful of rail facilities within western North Dakota. And so as we look forward, we were seeing a scenario where we had a tremendous need long-term to find some NGL solutions. Again, whether that was going to be expanding rail, expanding pipeline opportunities, or finding ways to use those NGLs in state. And one of those solutions came forward this summer. Kinder Morgan announcing that they were going to take one of their crude oil pipelines out of crude oil service next year, and then by 2026 have that conversion done. And so we were able to stack on one incremental NGL solution here starting in 2026, and then in beyond 2026. Again, we're in a scenario where if we can't build out our NGL infrastructure, the one benefit with NGLs is that it does have the flexibility to move by truck or rail. So I don't see this as one of the holdups to development. I think that falls far more on the residue transmission side that we just talked about. The opportunities here are fantastic, and you'll see even those base case scenarios well over 1 million barrels a day of NGLs. And then I talked about this a moment ago, that natural gas storage field. It's got a working capacity between the WBI system of right around 190 BCF per day. They're only using just shy of 50 BCF, so there's a tremendous amount of buffer right there. There was some discussions at a recent shipper meeting that WBI had to expand capacity at the field, expand connectivity to and from that. So again, this is front and center in that discussion of how do we shape North Dakota's infrastructure to meet tomorrow's needs. And then lastly, I'll leave you with a little bit of fun, right? So Preston was touching on this, a question that a lot of us get asked, where is North Dakota at in this? Earlier this year, the 5 billion barrel celebration, you had some numbers come out last year from Lynn Helms about kind of his inventory outlook. You had an outlook from Preston of some of the things he's seen. And so the question, everybody likes the baseball analogy, what inning are we in, right? When you take a look at the numbers, it would probably suggest here that we're kind of mid-game or approaching mid-game level. And I push back on that because, again, just knowing and being part of North Dakota's play for the last 20 years has been fabulous. And I think if we're going to think about it in baseball terms, we got to think about it in terms of a different baseball game, right? That's the longest Major League Baseball game that ever took place was 33 innings. And so I think we're headed for extra innings. So anybody that wants to think about it in a 9-inning outlook, I think you might be surprised. So a lot of those opportunities you'll hear about later today from John at the EERC, whether it's refracs, EOR opportunities. EOR NGL, that is one, I got another email today. There's a lot of fun and exciting folks looking at whether or not a near-term solution for places like the Bakken is using excess NGLs or NGL production, whether that's propane, butane for enhanced oil recovery, nanotechnology, all these different things. So as we look at the Bakken, 400 billion, 900 billion, pick your number of how much resource we think is in the ground. we've only produced 5 billion of it so far. And so I think that we've got a tremendous amount of running room. There's too many smart people looking at this for us to think we're anywhere near the end here. So hopefully, I don't know what the year will be, but someday there'll be a 50 billion barrel Bakken celebration, I hope. So maybe my kids will be there celebrating at that time. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions if we have time. Otherwise, you give me the hook and I'll sit down. So
I've got one for you.
Yeah.
I've kind of wondered about for a long time. Every oil well has a decline curve. Tell me what the gas decline curve looks like.
Yep.
Is there such a thing?
Yep. So the natural gas, it does decline directionally for the most part, and it will ultimately at some point go down. What we've found with the Bakken oil curves and the Bakken natural gas curves is a much more shallower decline, and there are even examples of older wells that as that well hits bubble point that we start seeing some leveling off, some extreme outliers. You start to see natural gas production increasing again. On a typical curve, it will decline, but a much shallower rate than it does on the crude oil. And that's one of those challenges going forward. Yep.
What role do ducks play in all this?
Yep.
Hours to like build it up.
Yep. So great question. I pulled my duck slide out of drilled but uncompleted wells. I pulled that out. In North Dakota, we have a very small and dwindling inventory of what we would traditionally call ducks. There was times where we had hundreds of drilled but uncompleted wells in North Dakota. That is now down to sub 30 drilled but uncompleted wells. So it's almost a non-factor. We are incredibly reliant today on the drill bit and the permitting and that cycle, far more than 5 years ago when we could say, forget the rig count, we don't care, we got 300 or 400 ducks to pull from. That's gone. We need the rigs and we need the bit turning to keep this thing moving.
What does the crystal ball say about that data coming back? Because that was a huge deal.
It was a huge deal. I don't think it's coming back. Preston, do you think duck build-up inventory is coming back?
I think capital will be converted to production as fast as they can.
Yeah. I mean, if you didn't hear him, so he thinks capital is going to try and convert that to production as quickly. So he doesn't. I think we're in agreement there.
In the 5Cs, look at 5Cs, imply contraction, gas gap, huge issue, we see it. What do you see on that, on number, the fit, you see the contraction side?
Yep. So he was asking about contraction, right? That undesired scenario of what happens if we can't get enough solutions in place. What does that look like? It would most likely not look like a scenario where we see activity go to zero. It might not even be something that, it may even be difficult to measure how much contraction, because I think, Preston, you and I have talked, there's examples where quietly a company may choose not to add another rig in here that, any of us on the surface, we have no idea what decisions are being made at these companies of how they're going to allocate their capital. But there are examples out there of companies pulling back activity in North Dakota. They may have opportunities in Oklahoma or the Gulf Coast that can just as easily provide that return on that investment just as easily. So if we are constrained either at the local level or at a macro scale at the statewide level, I think it would be one of those, call it a silent killer, right? That it'd be difficult to measure what could be versus what ends up being the reality if we're constrained. Does that kind of answer the question? Okay.
We always hear that there's a price point that producers need to get $60, $80, $100 a barrel to make it work. Is there ever been a conversation about what the price point would be to change things from a natural gas side? Natural gas has been so weird the last 20 years. It was high, then it was low, then we didn't care, now we care. It's all over the map.
Yep.
Is there a price point where someone's going to come in and say it actually makes sense to build a transmission line? Are things you're following with that?
Yep. So the question, if you weren't able to, is how does natural gas pricing tie into the overall economics for a Bakken well and those decisions to drill and whether or not gas prices could fluctuate either up or down to change some of those decisions. And I would say by and large in kind of the general market we're at, natural gas plays a very small piece of that economic decision. It's still many times over amplified by the price of crude oil in those decisions. So we've got an unfortunate scenario taking place right now as a proxy or an example that I hope we don't get to in North Dakota, what's happening in West Texas right now. There's a natural gas pricing hub called Waha. Over half of the trading days for natural gas in West Texas this month at the Waha hub have been negative, so that producers are actually paying money to get rid of their natural gas. Their pipe capacity is short. The intense competition there has forced producers to have to compete against each other. Who's going to pay more so that they don't have to flare that natural gas? And so I far more see us in a scenario where we just have to worry about constraints on the natural gas, our ability to move it to support the oil production, versus a scenario where I don't foresee any type of near-term or even medium-term solution or opportunity where natural gas prices would get so high that they're driving the investment decisions, right? This is an oil play, and will probably forever be that way. Okay, well, thank you very much again, Jeff and everyone.